Nicole, I always feel if I give a bio now, everyone's already read your bio on the internet and everything, so they don't care. So
No.
what we want to know is if you were at the ECTA conference right now, what would you be shopping for?
Oh, well, it's funny because last year at the ECTA conference, we had a table as well. So we had some of our books and resources there. And we got positioned right next to Explore Nook, and they've got all the beautiful bamboo
Oh, yes.
they had beautiful bamboo brushes and whatnot. So anyway, we got placed next to them, and so of course we shopped, and now we stock some of their stuff as well. So
Oh.
that's probably what I'd be doing. I'd be going and looking for other things that we might sort of stock in our online store as well. So we like being able to support kind of local and small businesses, and finding something a little bit unique. So that's definitely what I'd be shopping for. And books, as you can probably tell, I'm kind of into books. They're a little colour coordinated as well. That probably gives a little bit of an insight into my personality too. So needless to say, my children's books are not so colour coordinated. My 10-year-old son is extremely into books and has always got a book in his hand, which is brilliant. But yes, his books are definitely nowhere near as coordinated as mine, but I can let that go.
Okay. And what was the last professional development, except for the keynote, that you have attended or presented? Can be online or in person.
Well, it's actually been a quiet couple of months for me, as it has, I suppose, for a lot of people. So usually I'd be doing 1 or 2 sessions a week on various topics. But obviously that's been really quiet. We haven't been able to travel or to even go into services and do the sort of training that we normally do. So that's been quiet. We've been delivering some online courses, which has been really good. But we also have had some guest speakers do some training for our website, and we had one on Thursday. Heather Burnt Santy, she's from the US, and she does a podcast called That Early Childhood Nerd. And she did a really great session about discussing behaviour with families and sort of really rethinking the way that we might sometimes bombard families with, hey, your child hit someone today, or what the minute they walk in the door. And, so it was really good. It was lots of really kind of reflective things to think about, I suppose. So, that was a really good one, and the most recent.
Okay, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Nicole, and I'm sure she won't disappoint us.
Tough. Hi, everyone. Thank you to those who have got their videos on. I know not everyone's comfortable with it, and that's okay. I completely get that as well. But yeah, it is nice sometimes to see some faces because you feel like you're not talking into the abyss. So that's really lovely. So this is definitely a different way of us kind of doing our professional development. I think it might be a bit of a way we're doing things for a while to come. So I suppose we're getting used to it. So as Christiane said, my bio was in all the information, so you've probably seen that. Just as a little brief rundown, I guess, I'm a former director and early childhood educator, but I'm also currently the nominated supervisor for our Inspired Family Daycare. So I've sort of just taken on that role. I've been the approved provider for the last 6 years, but yeah, I've sort of stepped into a maternity relief position of nominated supervisor for the next few months. So that's another thing to add for me, I suppose. As I said, I've got 3 children who obviously are not in the house right now because it would not be this quiet. They've thankfully gone off to Nan and Pop's today, so they've gone and done their thing, so it is very much a quiet house. So hopefully there'll be no interruptions today, unless someone decides to start mowing their lawn outside or something, and that tends to happen when you're doing a Zoom meeting. We've had Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting over the last few months, and that tends to be the case. So as we said before, if you want to comment, and there are a few opportunities where I'll actually ask a question and it would be really great to get some response. That's usually what we would do if we were all in the room together. I'd be asking you to think about things and to share your experiences. One of the big things about professional development, in my opinion, is that it's not about coming to hear someone give you all the information. It's kind of like what we say with children. So with children, we tend to say, you know, there's that quote about it's the lighting of a fire, not the filling of a bucket, that kind of thing. I like to think that educators are much the same. My job isn't to come in and just fill you with information so you walk away and go, okay, I've got that. It's a shared experience, and I think there's a lot of knowledge, I would usually say, within the room, but within the Zoom room, there is a lot of knowledge. You know, we all come from different backgrounds, different experiences, so it's really great to be able to share that. So if those opportunities come up, if you want to unmute yourself, as we said, you can do that by holding the space bar, which I've just learnt today and I'm so excited about. You can hold the space bar to temporarily unmute yourself while you talk. You can also share in the chat box if you're not comfortable speaking up, and that's okay as well. But I'll try and give time for that. Sometimes we might talk over each other, but we'll just kind of navigate through that. It's one of the downsides, I think, of Zoom, is that you end up with 3 people talking at once and we all talk over the top of each other, but we work it out in the end. So we will get on to that. All right. So we are talking about the drama of play.
Sorry guys, I just wanted to say Nicole will share her PowerPoint afterwards, so that that will be in your email that goes out at 5 o'clock.
Yes, absolutely. If you're a note taker and you want to take notes, you're more than welcome to do that as well. And also, if there's anything, because I've tried to make it not too information heavy on the PowerPoint, so it's more conversation. If there's anything that I mention that you want more information on, my contact details will be at the end as well, so you're more than welcome to get in touch afterwards and I can kind of provide you with links or more information for anything like that. So this session came about when I was thinking about the way that children play in a dramatic kind of sense, and we know that children do that. That's quite typical behaviour for children, and I started to think about the way that that happens, and one of the key things for me was around the recurrent themes in children's play. And funnily enough, I was checking over my session this morning and I made a quick call to my mum to check on my children. They'd stayed there last night, so I thought I'll ring and just check in this morning before I start and see how things are going. And my mum said, well, the younger 2 are currently being, one's a cat and the other's a dog. And she said, so I'm trying to move around the kitchen and I've got a dog under one foot and a cat under the other, and the cat's chasing the dog. And I thought that's so funny that she mentioned that this morning, when that's one of the key things that sparked the concept of this session for me, is that recurrent themes in play, and cats and dogs is one of the huge themes that we see over and over and over again. So we're going to talk a little bit about why that happens. So yeah, that kind of sparked a bit of interest in me, and I thought I need to know more and to understand a little bit more about children's play. So I actually read a book, and I'll show you the book now. It's called Boys and Girls, and it's called Boys and Girls Superheroes in the Doll Corner. And it's an American book, and it was written, I have a feeling it was written, this version was 2014, so it's not too bad, but I have a feeling it might have been an older edition before that. But it talks a lot around the gender roles within children's play, which can be a really interesting topic as well. But there was a lot of information in there, so that's a book that I would recommend in terms of play, and it really helped me to understand a little bit more about why some of these play themes recur and why it's important that we facilitate those. So that's the direction we're going today. I will flick through here. All right, so what are we going to cover? We're going to look at a lot of things actually in a pretty short time frame. So we're going to talk about the value of dramatic play, why it's important for children. That question again of why we see some recurring themes in children's play. The role of the educator. So what is my role as an educator in supporting the dramatic play of children? And the role that the environment plays as well. So the environment that we set up or the environment that children have access to. Some superhero weapon play stuff, because that can be a bit of a confronting issue for some people. How we can challenge gender stereotypes, and then also observing and documenting dramatic play. So lots to cover. As I say, if you've got questions at any time, feel free to shout out or pop them in the chat box. All right, so why is dramatic play important? Who feels comfortable to share this is why I think dramatic play is important?
Because parents can't replicate it at home in an environment with so many different personalities around them.
Yeah, often we don't have the resources at home and the opportunity for children to engage in that, what's often referred to as that socio-dramatic play. So, children being engaged with one another. So unless you have several children, and I discover that with my own children, sometimes they'll play some really in-depth dramatic games at home between them because there are 3 of them and they can have that together. If I have one child at home, it's much more difficult for them to do that. I can see some stuff happening in the chat box. Let's see, to explore and act out interests and anxieties. We're going to talk a little bit about that shortly because that is really important. Encourages communication, problem solving, imagination, more advanced language skills, developing empathy and creativity. Beautiful. Excellent. So, we know as educators that play is how children learn. Children learn through play. We know that. It's a really simple concept that I think we've all pretty much got a handle on in early childhood. Hopefully that'll start making its way up through the older years as well. I'd really like to see that happen, but we've got a handle on it in early childhood. We know that children learn through their play. So that acting out and that role play, that imaginative play is a crucial part of that. I'll just get my screen to do what it's supposed to do. Here we go. All right, so the benefits of dramatic play, and these are definitely not all of them, but just some really great places to start. So social development, and there's a quote here, play also hinges on knowing how to read social cues, recognise and regulate emotions, and to take turns. And that's a huge part of what happens in dramatic play. So, children will plan a game, and funnily enough, Peter Gray talks a lot about, if anyone's familiar with Peter Gray, I've got his book here somewhere, I'll find it in a minute. But Peter Gray talks about he defines play, and he's got a great article on a website called Psychology Today. If you haven't seen the article before, definitely have a look. If you just go to psychologytoday.com and have a look for Peter Gray, you'll find it. I'm pretty sure the article's called Defining Play, something, something, something. It's one of my most referred back to articles. And so Peter talks about the way in which we define play, and that there are key factors in what makes something play as opposed to what makes something, say, an activity that we might provide for children. So some of the key conditions or definers for play that Peter has identified in his research is that play is freely chosen. So it's something that children choose to do. So it's not something we give them to do. So if we were to say, let's play a game of cops and robbers, you're this team, you're the cops, you're the robbers, this is how we're going to play it. It's not technically play, it's something we've given children to do, it's an activity. Whereas you will find that children will they will choose to play that themselves as a group or as an individual. They'll make choices about what they play and how they play it. They'll also make their own rules about that. So where a game that we might play, say we might play Duck Duck Goose or Red Rover Crossover or something like that. We have very specific rules about how we play those games. And as adults, we will generally explain those rules to children. This is how the game goes. The rules generally don't change. They are quite standard rules that are commonly accepted, and that's how the game is played. It might be playful, but it's not technically under Peter's definition of play, which is quite widely recognised. It's not technically play. So when we're looking at our dramatic play and what children are doing, say in the home corner or outside or wherever, that's the sort of stuff we're looking for, those freely chosen play scenarios. So where children have chosen, you'll be the mum, I'll be the baby, and we're going to the shops, and and the children who want to play come and play, and the children who don't want to play don't play, they do something else. So we've freely chosen that play. We've also, children will specify the rules, and those rules might not necessarily be you can't do this and you must do it this way, but they're conventions around play. So the rule, or the commonly accepted rule, might be that the mum's always a girl. We always say that it's a girl, and when we're in this group of friends, it's always Sarah. Sarah's always the mum, and that's the rule of this play scenario that we have. And so you might have this group of children that plays this mums and babies game every single week, and every single week the rule is that Sarah's the mum, and it's generally commonly accepted. Now you might get a child that kind of wants to say, hey, you know what, I want to be the mum, Billy says, I want to be the mum. Let me be the mum. And so he might buck that trend or whatever. But generally, we've got this commonly accepted set of rules and social conventions around the play, and the children will agree to that. Sometimes it's verbal, and they'll say, we need to do X, Y, and Z. This is how we play. Other times, it really does come down to those social cues. So it might be that we're playing cats and dogs, and the dogs begin to bark, and the cats take that as a cue to run, or to crawl away, whatever it is that they do. So they're recognising the social cues. They learn to take turns, regulate their emotions, all that sort of stuff through that play. It kind of leads really well into the next point around the importance of role-playing real-life scenarios. And this is actually from a really recent article that was written about play in the age of coronavirus. And it was the article was talking about, and I can definitely send you the link if you want the link. The article was talking about how it's important for children to have the opportunity to play coronavirus because it gives them an opportunity to understand their reality, to engage in consequence-free situations, and to kind of work through these big concepts and ideas that might be challenging for them at the moment. And it's funny because a couple of days ago, just after I'd read the article, one of our staff at Inspired said to me, she said, how funny, my daughters at school were playing this coronavirus game. She said, one child was the virus, and they all had to, get away from the virus. But if they were near the bubblers, they were safe because they could wash their hands. And, there was this whole rule about it. And she said, doesn't that seem crazy? And I said, you know what, it does, but it's really important for them. And I think for all of us, we're kind of going, gee, the world seems crazy right now. And I mean, things are starting to settle, unless you're in Victoria, and things don't feel very settled right now. I think the toilet paper thing's gone crazy again. But things are starting to settle. But I think for a lot of us, our whole reality has really been shaken. And for children, it's just heightened because there's a lot of abstract concepts that they just can't make sense of. What does this look like? What does this mean for me? Is this something I need to be scared of? I can remember the first time we took our kids to the shops after kind of lockdown and restrictions and everything had eased. And so we'd kept them away from shops for a couple of months. And it's only been in the last few weeks that we've sort of taken them into a store, and we said, you know, when we go into the shops, you need to stay with us. And so they're 5, 7 and 10. So we're like, you need to stay with us. Try not to touch things. You know, when we come back out to the car, we will sanitize your hands. You know, and we sort of had this conversation with them. And the whole way as they're walking around, they're kind of like looking around. Like there was this real paranoia, and I'm like, oh, have we made them paranoid about germs and about people being sick? And, you know, someone coughed 3 aisles over, and my son's like, why is that person coughing? Maybe they have coronavirus. And I'm like, oh gosh, what have we done? But for children, they really need that opportunity to play out scenarios. So even aside from the whole coronavirus thing, you'll often find that children who are having maybe some emotional difficulties at home maybe will play out some of those scenarios. And sometimes it can be a way of making sense of their world, you know, just putting it out there, getting it out, acting it out, and starting to make sense of what it means for them. Sometimes it can actually be a way of unloading, you know, or sharing information. It's funny, a friend of mine said to me yesterday that her daughter, who's 3, had been, her and her daughter had been playing in the afternoon. They'd made these cardboard dolls, and they were playing with the dolls. And she said they were, you know, playing beautifully. And then she said to her daughter with the doll, she said, and how are you today? And her daughter said, I'm really sad. And she held the doll up, you know, I'm really sad. She said, oh, why are you sad? Because my daddy's been at work all the time and he doesn't play with me anymore. And she has this whole story about how, you know, and it's all through the doll. The doll's saying that, you know, the dad has been at work. And that's what's happened in the family. Dad changed jobs, and so his work hours have changed, and so he's not working from home as much. And, you know, for her as a 3-year-old, she hadn't verbalized that at all in any way, shape or form up until now. And it's through that dramatic play that she's been able to do that. So I think we sort of can sometimes underestimate, and it doesn't mean that everything that children do in dramatic play is something that's going on at home either. Sometimes we see, you know, some really strange themes coming out in children's play, and you think, oh my gosh, is that something I need to be concerned about? Not necessarily, but it's just, I think we can observe children's play, and we will talk about that later, just with that in mind, that children are trying to make sense of the world. And sometimes that will look strange to us, you know, and we think, why are they doing that? But it's just them trying to make sense of that. And I'm just going to move my little box over here so I can see this section. So one of the other benefits is the opportunity to practice skills, and that might be our physical skills, our social skills, communication skills, life skills. You know, in terms of physical skills, it might be that when we're playing house and we have, you know, jars of pretend food, or that children are learning to undo the jars or to open a container. When they're putting on dress ups, they might be learning to do up a zipper or buttons. So they're those basic physical skills and life skills. You know, the communication skills can be part of that social interaction as well. So how we communicate our needs in play. You know, and it's a good opportunity to practice. Again, it goes back to that. It's practicing those things in a non-threatening way, and an authentic way for children. So if I was to sit down with a group of children and say, let's work on our fine motor skills, and we're all going to do this, and you know, it's very inauthentic. Whereas if we just watch, we find that most children pick up those skills when they're given the opportunity in play. And that also comes down to the environment and the resources that we provide for them to be able to facilitate those skills. All right, before I move on, does anyone have any questions or anything they want to share? You're welcome to unmute yourself.
I was just thinking when you said something about, yes, I know which family use the wooden spoon as a behavior management tool in their house when you have a wooden spoon in home corner.
Yes, often it does give you a little bit of an insight. And look, there'll be parents that are horrified sometimes by, you know, the things that come out of children in their play. And for the most part, it's quite non-troubling, but occasionally it's like, oh, that I might watch that. I'll just keep an eye on that, because it can give you a real insight into children's lives. And I know as a parent, sometimes I've heard my children say things to each other during play, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds like it just came out of my mouth. You know, it's like it's something that I would have said to them about, you know, cleaning up after dinner or whatever, like just something really little, but I'm like, oh man, that's me. That's exactly what I've said. So yeah, we will definitely see ourselves reflected back in dramatic play, and we'll find that sometimes, you know, as educators, when children play teachers or schools, and, you know, all of a sudden you're kind of looking, going, is that really what I sound like? Do I sound like that? Do I do that? You know, am I making them feel like that? So yeah, it can definitely be a bit of a mirror held up to our practice, I guess. All right, so why do we see recurring themes in children's plays? So as I said before, you know, it's those things like dogs and cats, mums and babies, cops and robbers, you know, some of those really key things. Often we'll see superhero play, you know, and I'm the baddie and I'm gonna, you know, then the good guy's gonna come in and save the day or whatever. So there's many reasons why we might see that. You know, one of them is common experiences. So children in our care often experience some really common things. So that might be the arrival of a new baby. You know, that happens a lot in our care. We'll often have children in our care who have a new baby at home, or mum's having a new baby, and so we might have the role play of, you know, the baby up the shirt and, you know, then the baby's coming out and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So we have that, and again, that's that way of making sense of this new experience, and sometimes that can give us a really great insight into how the child feels about a new baby arriving. You know, particularly when that baby's dropped on its head, you're like, maybe I should suggest to the parent that they're not left alone with that baby. They're not perhaps so happy about that. But other things like having a pet, you know, maybe they've got a new dog and so we're playing dogs and cats or whatever. Maybe someone's broken their arm, and so all of a sudden we've got this really interesting hospital role play, and so they're wanting to be the doctor, and, you know, so it's really common things, but they come out of really common experiences. So they're often, with the exception probably of the cops and robbers and the superheroes, they're often things that children will experience in their day-to-day lives. If not every day, it might be, you know, key events that we see that children have. And another big part of that's being part of a household. You know, children will play what they see, and so a large part of what children see in their day may be time in care, and so it may be that they're then, you know, acting out that group time or the transitions, or everybody come and line up at the door, and, you know, those sorts of things, because they're seeing that that's a big part of their day. It may be that they're cooking dinner because that's what they see when they go home. You know, mum's cooking dinner or dad's cooking dinner or whatever, and so they're acting that out because they're seeing that. So it's familiar. The other reason we see recurring themes in children's play is that the environment can set the stage. So how do you think the physical environment might speak to children? Be brave.
Well, I know that we recently had the babies in home corner, and then we changed it to the pets in home corner, like a few soft toys in there, and you could really see that the kids had to rethink about their play, because they usually had one of the children being a pet. But it was nice to see that they then played different households coming to visit, and they built 2 different houses in the kindergarten environment.
Excellent. All right, I think something come in the chat box, but I can't see it. Where'd it go? Come back.
It can be, it can be an invitation to play. That's in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So a prime example of this, and one that I still find fascinating and I'm not sure I'll ever fully understand, is so the service that I was a director of, when I first started there, we had this play structure in the playground, and it was one of those metal and plastic kind of things with a tall bit with a slide and, you know, steps up the back, that kind of basic thing. And then on one side it had one of those, I think it was supposed to be like an abacus. So, you know, it's got the poles across ways with the balls, the coloured balls, and the children could slide the coloured balls across. You know, I don't know what they're supposed to be doing with them. They're a pretty strange addition to a piece of play equipment, but so it had that. Every single year, without fail, until I removed that structure, it was an ice cream shop. Always, at some point throughout the year, it was an ice cream shop. And the children would stand there, and so on one side was a window, or kind of like a cutout, and then on the other side was the abacus. And so they would stand at the window and say to the other children, what would you like to order? And they'd say, I'll have, you know, whatever flavour. And the children would turn to the abacus and they'd spin the balls, slide them along, and there's your ice cream. Every single year without fail that happened. And I really still, again, try to recognise exactly why that happened. And I think it's a combination of two things. So I think it's the environment, that physical piece of equipment seemed to speak to children in that way for whatever reason, whether it was the colours, the spinning of it, I don't know. The window obviously kind of lends itself to a shop. But also, which goes across to the third point around the cultural impact, is that observing peers. So all it seemed to need to be was that one child from last year was still here this year, and so the play continued. And it was like it created a culture where year after year there was always at least one child who could carry on that play theme and teach it to a whole bunch of new children. So I found that a really interesting play scenario. The physical environment also speaks to children in the way that, you know, what we set out. So what we provide will send a message of how we expect that children may play, but also the layout of the space can really speak to children as well. So in our outdoor spaces, where we have hidey holes, that might sort of set a different tone for the way that children play, and they might play hiding games and chasing games. Outdoor play, like outdoor dramatic play, often varies quite significantly to what occurs indoors, and that's usually a result of the environment. Then there's also the cultural impact, and so that can be, as I said before, that observation of peers, so seeing how other people are playing and absorbing that. And so we have that, you know, that, and it tends to happen a lot when we have mixed age grouping, and so we've got that scaffolding, the older children kind of setting the example with their play, and the younger children will often pick up on that. But then there's also obviously popular culture, you know, I mean, for a long time, and funnily enough, I mean, I don't know if Spider-Man's even still really a big thing, and yet it's still really a big thing in children's play, and it's just become a cultural thing. But we will see that come in with every new fad and new craze that happens. Children will bring that in some way, shape or form. And that's the impact of, you know, television and children's marketing. There's a really good book called, I think it's called Consuming Kids, and it's about the consumer culture and marketing to children that happens. And again, it's based in the US, but very, very eye-opening. All right, we've got a couple of chat box things going on. What have we got? Oh, look at that. Someone else has seen the same type of ice cream shop play with the same type of equipment. So there you go. So the equipment obviously is speaking to children. That's just, I love that. Oh, Elsa's frozen power. Yes, absolutely. You know, the children they'll pick up on those things, and, you know, Let It Go might become a really intense thing. But that absorption of some of those play themes, it's just inevitable. You know, it's inevitable, and it might frustrate us sometimes. But I think, you know, it's important. And I think actually in the book I was talking about before, and again, I can put the details of the book in the chat box too, that there's a bit of stuff in there, I think, about that role of popular culture and how it plays into children's play as well. All right, any other questions before we move on? Questions, comments?
Lottie wrote, at some stage the children always play the floor as lava at the obstacle course.
Yes. And it's funny because again, you think, where does that come from? I noticed my children playing it one day and just kind of went, where did that even come from? Like, it's just one of those things that seems to cycle around. And yeah, it's just very interesting to see how that progresses. And you tend to notice it too, I think, when children move from the early childhood environment into the school environment. So I've noticed that the dramatic play is different, but it's still occurring, but they're slightly different play themes. They tend to be more chase related and, you know, things like that, as opposed to kind of that direct interaction that we might see in early childhood. And someone else used to play the same ice cream shop game. Excellent. It's just one of those things, I think. All right. So we'll move on a little bit to the environment. So the environment sends a message to children about how we expect them to play. Whether we intend it to do that or not, when we set up an environment, in whatever way we set it up, it really does send a message to children. This is what we're expecting you to do here. Now, some children will still fight that and they'll do something completely different there, but a lot of children will go, oh, well, this is what's expected, this is how I will play. So if we set out dolls, then generally we expect baby related play. We set out a whole bunch of dolls and blankets and bottles, and we'll expect some baby related play. Some children might, you know, rebel against that and the babies get shafted somewhere else. I can remember finding babies in the oven and thinking, oh, this is an interesting type of play. But yeah, it really does come down to the environment that we provide for children. So I think this is interesting. This comes from a research paper, and it said pretend play was at its most sustained and rich level when children could move between small, intimate spaces and large open areas. Now, I find that interesting because while a lot of services are starting to move towards having indoor-outdoor programs, it's not always possible for every service. So if you're sitting there thinking, we'd love to do that, but it doesn't work, that's okay. But a lot of services are moving towards children being able to flow between the indoor environment and the outdoor environment. And when I read this, I thought that makes sense. You know, children need that flow and to be able to move between spaces. And often when we're indoors, we tend to have more small, intimate spaces, less large open area. Why do we have less large open area indoors? Generally because we say, oh, if we've got a large open space, the children will run. And they do, because that's what large and open generally speaks to children. So if we can get outside, we see different play. But yeah, the play was at its most sustained and rich level when children could move between those intimate small spaces and the large open spaces. And that allows them to have a better flow of play. And again, that also really says a lot for that, the flow of children's play, and us as educators giving children permission as such to move their play to other spaces. So while we may have set out, you know, the babies and the baby things and whatever over in this area, do we enable children and allow children to feel comfortable in taking those babies and putting them into prams and taking them to the block area and then building them a playpen out of blocks or whatever, and then we put them in the pram again and we take them outside and the babies go for a picnic or, you know, whatever. Sometimes we can get caught up in those things belong in that space, and so it's, oh, can you take the babies back to the home corner? And we can actually stop the play. I know I went to a professional development session quite a few years ago with Mark Armitage, and he was saying about, you know, children's flow of play and how we can really kind of halt it. And the example he gave was of a child, you know, skipping. And so the child's skipping with a skipping rope and whatever, and they're skipping along, and then along the path, they find a bucket. And, you know, the bucket, they decide, is good for the game that they were playing where they were skipping, whatever. But they've dropped the skipping rope, picked up the bucket and gone over to a different part, and their game is still going, and they possibly intend to return to that skipping rope, but the educator sees the dropped skipping rope and says, hey, you need to come, get the skipping rope, go and put the skipping rope back in the bucket with the other skipping rope so that people can play. And we can get really caught up in these things belong here, you put it away when you're done. But our idea of when children are done may be very different to their idea of when they're done. Which, you know, for people who like a nice tidy environment, that can be really challenging, because you can end up with stuff kind of everywhere, you know. And I guess it's the detritus of play, I suppose. You know, you have that mess, and you need to be able to see beyond that, and see the value of kind of the flow of play, being able to see that, you know what, these children are playing this game and they've played this game for 3 hours now. It's just that this game's taken them between different spaces and, you know, left a mess in different places, but they're coming back and they're circling back to that space, and, you know, it looks like mess to us, but, you know, anyway. So the point about that flow, letting children have that flow, being able to take their play in different places, and, you know, to kind of just let the play lead, I guess, you know, rather than us saying, well, that play has to happen here. Okay, so I've got 2 examples here. So the top one is a traditional home corner. So both of these images have come via Pinterest. They don't have an actual credit to them, just a Pinterest credit. But if anyone knows where they're from, I'd love to know. But the top one's kind of your really traditional home corner, which a lot of services have. You know, I have really fond memories of my own preschool when I was, you know, 4, and we had very much that same sort of setup. We had the little washing machine and the sink and the table and chairs. We had a basket of dress ups and, you know, all those sorts of things. So it's quite traditional, and most services probably have a space set up like that. There's nothing inherently wrong with that space. But the equipment is quite specific, and it does send quite a clear message about the type of play that we expect will occur here. Whether that play will necessarily occur is a different thing, but that's what we're sort of sending to children, is this is a home, and so we're expecting that you'll probably, you know, you might play restaurants, but you might play, you know, families, or you might play, you know, another sort of game, but generally it's kind of that householdy, you know, kind of play. That's the sort of message we're sending. Now we might change that up and go, you know what, the children have been really interested in this whole dogs and cats thing. Let's turn it into a pet shop. And so we bring in some other equipment, and we bring in some stuffed toys, and we bring in some of the doctor's things that can double as vet things, and, you know, we bring all of that stuff in. And so the children arrive and they see that and go, oh, great, we've got a pet shop, or we've got a vet surgery, or whatever. So we're, again, sending a really clear message about the type of play that we're thinking will happen there. Now, that generally comes from a really great place. It comes from us observing the way that the children are playing and taking that interest and thinking, great, I'll facilitate that interest. I'll provide them with some props. I'll provide them, you know, with a space to do that. Now, the problem that can arise is that, you know, half of the children want to play pet shop or vets or whatever, and half of the children want it to be a home corner, or they want it to be a school, or they want it to be a shop or a restaurant, or, you know, whatever other sort of dramatic play scenario they've got in mind. And so we have that conflict, and then we can have that destruction of the home corner, or, you know, that interruption of the play. So you might have a group of children that are quite happy to play home corner, and then another group of children that are really not happy with that, and so they'll interfere with that play, or interrupt that play. So the alternative to that, which I was introduced to quite a few years ago now, and just went, oh, why didn't I see it before, was the idea of deconstructed role play. And so this is a bit more of a common idea in the UK, and the general concept is that it's open-ended, loose parts kind of materials, and the play can be anything. So if I want it to be a pet shop, I can turn it into a pet shop. I can take some boxes, and I can take some material, and I can, you know, find a bowl and I can turn it into a pet shop. I can access the props that I need, and I can make it that. But there's also enough space that the other person who wants it to be a baby space can set up their cot and have their baby play happening, and the two can coexist. And so it's giving children freedom to make choices within their play. So you know, loose parts has become really quite a buzzword or a popular thing within our services, but I think it can be applied to the way we do a lot of our things. And I'll be completely honest, the top photo is far more visually appealing than the bottom. You know, the bottom photo for a lot of people, they go, oh, it's just a mess. But you know what? It's the children's mess. It's theirs to create with. I mean, you give a child a box or a handful of boxes of any description, and they can create wonderful things with it, you know, and things that my imagination wouldn't have even thought of. And, you know, if I don't have a washing machine and they want to use a washing machine, they can create one out of a box. If I don't have a vet dress up, I'm not going to have a big disaster on my hands because, oh, you don't have a vet shirt, because I've got material and pegs and you can turn it into a vet dress up. Or you can take that big piece of white material and you can take it over to the art space and you can draw on it and we can, you know, cut pictures or whatever. We can do whatever to it because it's not specific, you know, it's open-ended. So again, that research that I mentioned before really highlighted that as well. The researchers agreed that spaces for imaginative play must allow for any scenario or theme and must therefore provide open-ended opportunities. So I think that really links to that quite well. You know, when children have open-ended opportunities, the imagination's kind of endless. They can create what they need to create with it. So that space at the bottom there, as I say, may not be visually appealing for us as adults, but may represent a whole world of imaginative opportunities for children. So, you know, it's easy to get caught up in the, I'm going to create this beautiful looking space and children will come in and they'll see it and they'll want to play in it. And sometimes they don't play in it and they're not interested. And we've created this space and thought, oh, why aren't they playing there? And yet, you know, like the child who gets the box on Christmas Day and is far happier to open the box and play with the box than the new toy that they got. You know, children are given those open-ended kind of materials and they can work with them in their own way. So I think that concept of deconstructed role play would be far more interesting to see in services, and I'd like to challenge you to maybe think about that, you know, what that might look like in your service and how you'd let go of that control, I guess, because it is a control, you know, we sort of, and again, it comes usually from a place of I'm observing what the children are doing, how they're playing, and I'm trying to facilitate that. But, you know, for me now, if I was to set up a dramatic play space, it might not look exactly like the photo at the bottom, but I envision it with, say, a really big long shelf along one wall with a whole bunch of baskets with different props in it. And so there would be props for, you know, and it doesn't all have to be open-ended. I might still have some stethoscopes and I might still have some baby bottles and, you know, but I'd also have the open-ended things as well, so that we've got options, we've got choices, and we can turn it into what we need. I also think it's important that children know that they have access to materials and that they can ask for things if they need it as well. You know, we need this for our play. We need a, I don't know, a dog carrier. We need something we can carry the dogs in when we take them to the vets or whatever. They know they can ask for things and that we can provide that for them or help them to solve the problem and create something that's going to work for them. All right, are there any questions before we move on? What's in the chat box? Oh, someone's looking forward to trying it. Excellent. At the beginning of the year, our children would run and then eventually the dramatic play would become very involved, usually just before it's time to pack up. We ended up just letting it evolve as they began to form relationships. And that's it. I think when children need that, you know, they need that space and time. Time's such an interesting thing for children. Another book that is up on my shelf somewhere. Oh no, wait, it's just here. That's handy. So that one there, Balanced and Barefoot. So Angela Hanscom, who's the author of that book, founded a program called Timbernook in the US. We actually run a Timbernook program here in Newcastle, and she's a paediatric occupational therapist who works with children outdoors. And so the program's set up for children to play outside basically and develop all the core skills that they need. But she talks about the research that she's done and some research that she's also read where children seem to need about 40 minutes on average to settle into play. And so if we have a day, this is going really sidetracked, so sorry, but I just went, oh, I need to tell you that. If we have a day where the routine's really kind of rigid and we go, okay, we have group time, then we have indoor play, then we have morning tea, then we have outdoor play, then we have lunch, then we have another group time, then we have rest, then we have this, then we have that. We're breaking our day up into really small chunks where children don't get the opportunity to really settle into play ever. So they will just, you know, have this, I'm almost there, and they start this game and then bang, it's time to stop and have lunch now. And so the game stops. And that, again, we're going back to, you know, interrupting that flow of play. So that's a really good one. Just as an aside, Angela's actually doing a training session online for us next week. So if you want the details, you can find it on our website or you can email me about it. But she's well worth a listen to, that one. There's an idea circulating that too many resources and choices can be overwhelming. Absolutely. And I think we need to sometimes just tone down what we offer. I mean, even when you look in the top, at that top photo, there is a lot going on there. There's a lot of things happening in that space. I think it comes down to knowing the children that you have too, and working the age group that you're working with. So toddlers, when we try and give toddlers shrunken preschooler spaces, so it's exactly like the home corner or the block area or whatever that we have in the preschool room, and we shrink it down for toddlers, we tend to end up with environments that just get trashed, for lack of a better word. You know, we go in and see everything's been upended. You know, every block we have's been shoved in the kitchen sink or, you know, whatever, because they play in such different ways. So this is a completely different topic altogether, but the schematic play of toddlers is completely different. And so they become very overwhelmed with lots of materials that we expect to be a certain way. So I think it's important that we think about the type of materials that we're offering and not that abundance of structured stuff. You know, we can offer an abundance of loose parts, absolutely, because they can do anything with it. But we need to know our children, you know, and we know, I always think less is more, and then we can add things and get things out for children as they need them. And sometimes that might be that we observe them doing something and think, I'll just bring that out and they might use it. Or we observe them, listen to them, and then go, you know what, maybe they need this. And we could say, hey, do you need this? I've got it in the store, and will that help? Or, you know, whatever. So I think it's being really responsive to the way children play rather than getting everything out to begin with. You know, just letting the play unfold first and seeing what's needed. All right. So how do we create environments for dramatic play? So as I said, I think it's really important to have open-ended spaces and materials. So we want spaces that allow children to play in a variety of ways, allow them to play you know, and to flow through their play, to choose the materials that work for their play themes, not for what we've thought they're going to play like. We want to have dramatic play being available indoors and outdoors, you know, that and that may not be at the same time. It may be, you know, if you're in a service where you can make indoor outdoor play work, awesome. If you can't, that's okay too. It's working with what you do have, working with the environment that you have. I always think the outdoor environment should be able to be played. Like, you should be able to play in the outdoor environment even if nothing gets set up. So the prime example, I'm just keeping an eye on my time, the prime example for that for me was we had our shed key was lost for about a week once, so we couldn't get anything out of the outdoor shed, so there was no big climbing equipment or anything. And it really gave us an indication of how playful our space was and what our actual environment offered to children without the abundance of stuff that we dragged in and out every morning. And so the children became more resourceful, they became more imaginative in their play. And I always suggest it to people as a bit of a challenge now, you know, pretend to lose your shed key for a week and don't get anything out outside and watch how the children play. It'll give you a good insight into the children's play, but also into your environment, what you set up each day, whether you really need to set up as much each day. And, you know, I think that really kind of can open your eyes a little bit to the imagination. And then again, limit the themes. So it says down here, this again is from that same research, adults or researchers deciding on a themed area such as the snow scene, which was in the example, also proved to limit rather than extend imaginative play. So I've seen some beautiful examples, particularly on like Pinterest and Instagram, and of, you know, educators have spent hours creating this flower shop, or, you know, and they've put so much effort into it, and it definitely looks amazing, but it's actually limiting the play. You know, it's limiting some of that imagination that can take place when we provide more open-ended, kind of free opportunities for play. It's totally tight, just a second. There we go. All right, what is the role of the educator? So it's important for us as educators to think about how we interact with children in their dramatic play. So our role generally might be to provide our environment. So we're setting up the environment, whether that is more open-ended, we're still providing that for children, but our role is also to sometimes be involved. Sometimes the children draw us into that. Other times they don't want us involved and we're just observers, or we're just trying to stay out of the way altogether. We need to be really responsive to the messages that children send, and often they'll send those really bluntly and say, go away, we're trying to play, or they will just up and move. If you come too close, they will just get up and they will go somewhere else and play. So we need to be responsive to those messages. Other times, you know, like in that photo, they come to us and they bring us into that play. So it's about, you know, and it's our role in general. We're scaffolding where we can, but we're also letting children lead that play, you know, not taking it in the direction that we hope it will go, but enabling children to put it in the direction that they want it to go. Oh, I love that. We walked to the beach with our children and found that no equipment or planning was needed. They played differently every visit without any adult intervention. And so we find that at our Timbernook program too, because it's on a natural site and we don't have much there. We don't have much at all. We don't have a building, so we're completely outside, and the children play in such different ways. And in our school holiday program with our school-age children, it absolutely warms my heart to see school-age children, and these are like boys who are about 10 and 11, engaged in dramatic play. They're engaged in these really strong role play scenarios because there's nothing else there. You know, there's nothing else that detracts from that. So I really love that. Well, I missed that comment up there. Working on the bush kindy opportunities. In the meantime, have 2 days a term where we have no human-made toys. Awesome, only natural things. We invite families to bring in things. Have seen coconuts being babies and eggs, opening coconuts with rocks, etc. 100 palm leaves makes a lovely enclosure. Absolutely. Exactly what happens in our nature space. And that's it. I think we're seeing it in natural spaces. And so where services are going off the premises and maybe going to bush kindy or to the beach or whatever, we're starting to see that. And I know with some of our family daycare educators, we're seeing that, you know, they go off to these natural spaces. But then for some children, they come back. Some children don't get to go out to those, which, you know, that's really disheartening. But some come back and the play is quite different because the environment is quite different. So imagine if we can replicate that. You know, why can't we replicate what we have out there in those natural environments in our services every day? And again, it means that our environment looks different to what might be lovely and Instagrammable and what we might want parents to see when they walk in the door. I can remember as a director having parents come in for orientation, and we'd walk out to our playground and there would literally just be loose parts and stuff from one end of the place to the other, and there'd be a child walking along with a chicken under their arm, and I'd think, oh my gosh, these parents must think we do not do anything here, like we've not set up the environment. But it was quite the opposite. So much work went into what we were doing with the children, and we had such a rich pedagogy in place. But it was just that our expectations of the environment were that it was the children's environment. And teacher Tom is a great example of that. So he was at Woodland Park Cooperative Preschool over in Seattle for like 20 years. And the photos that I've seen of that place, and my business partner Tash has been fortunate enough to visit, I think, twice now. And she said it is not a pretty place. You know, the playground is not pretty at all. It's messy, but she said the play that's happening there is so rich and so valuable for those children. The prettiness is usually for us. Now, it doesn't mean that we want things to always be dirty and messy, and we've still got a responsibility and to make sure it's safe and all those sorts of things. But I think we need to kind of check our own values around what the environment should look like. Anyway, that linked back to the environment, but that's okay. So us as the educator, as I said, we've got to establish whether we should be involved, whether maybe we should step back. And that comes with experience, you know, actually assessing what's happening, whether I need to be involved or not. Sometimes we think we need to be involved to show that we're engaging with the children and that we're doing our job, but sometimes doing our job's actually just stepping back and letting them do what they need to do. So as I said, our educator role might be the provision of the environment, interaction, involvement, or being present. You know, sometimes it is just being present. I'm here, and they know I'm here. They'll come to me if they need me, but I'm not all up in their play. You know, I'm actually just letting their play unfold. It might also be observation, which we'll talk about in a minute, or supporting the social skill development. So sometimes children do need support in navigating the social situations around dramatic play, and that's where we can see a lot of kind of fighting happening between children. Tends to be in those dramatic play games, because he won't let me be the baby, I wanted to be the dog last time, you got to be the dog this time, you know, and we get those sort of difficulties in navigating. Does it mean we should come in and solve all those problems? No, because this is how children learn to solve those problems. And so when they're having to solve them in play, then that's a safer way for them to do that than when they get out into the world. They have no idea how to solve a problem or to have a disagreement with someone, or, you know, it's really about building those skills. Does it mean that we just let them go for it and hope that they'll get it? Maybe not. You know, we do need to provide some support, and sometimes that's modelling. Sometimes it's just a bit of coaching. You know, what could you do about that? You know, that must be frustrating. What could you do about that? And I try and do that with my own children sometimes, and sometimes it works, and other times it's like, nothing, I don't know. It's like, oh gosh. Sometimes it's harder than others. You know, it depends on the age of the children that you're working with. And sometimes it takes a really long time, and you think, oh, it'd be so much easier if I just said, why don't you be the baby this time, you be the baby next time? You know, it'd be easy for me to fix that problem, but they need to navigate that. And it's that is a big part of our role, is supporting them to navigate and develop those skills. All right, so weapon play. Let's talk about weapon play. So weapons, superheroes, all that kind of stuff. It can be a really tricky one. I know services where they say no guns, no gun play, no weapon play, no rough play, hands to yourself, that kind of thing. It's very, very black and white. There's other services where they're like, well, we're okay with this sort of play, but not with this. There's others where they're like, you know what, we're all good with it. So does anyone have arguments in favour of weapon play?
We, at my service, we always believe that if you're going to tell them no weapon play, they're going to find a way to do it. It might be a stick, it might be just a piece of Mobilo. And we have rather set up just the rules around it. And in any play, if you are pointing your gun at someone and they're not smiling, that means they're not enjoying the game. You know, if you're making someone a cat and they're not smiling, means they're not enjoying the game. So it's more about those social rules around the game. Yeah,
social rules and social cues. And children, if they don't have opportunities to practice those and to be, like, if you don't face a difficult situation where, you know, it sounds awful, but if you don't make someone cry, You know, you don't hurt someone and make them cry. It's very difficult to comprehend that sometimes your actions can upset somebody else. You know, this is all part of that learning experience. And I think you're so right. You know, I can remember when I first started in early childhood, it was very much no weapons, no guns, and the children would make them out of Lego. And, you know, but if you asked, is that a gun? It's like, no, it's not a gun, it's and they'd come up with some long convoluted story for what it was and why it wasn't a gun and how I'm not actually shooting that person. And, you know, exactly as it just came up in the chat box, water pistol, you know, there's always something else that it can be. And I think children will find a way to play that type of play, but it comes down to setting agreements. You know, how do we come up with, you know, establishing rules? Teacher Tom refers to them as agreements, which I really love because it's something that we all agree to. When I say these are the rules for weapon play, I could easily say, okay, the rules are you do this, then you do that. If you do this, you're out. When we have an agreement, we all sit down together. We talk about, why do we want to do this? Why do we want to play with pretend guns? Why do we want to have this game? Why do we think it's okay to have superheroes or baddies or whatever? What are the potential problems? What could happen? And the children are great at identifying those. Someone could get hurt. Someone could get upset. Someone could feel left out. You know, there's all number of problems. How do we deal with those problems? You know, what do we do? And then what do we do if someone actually breaks the agreement? If we've decided this is how we play with this, and we used to use this for rough and tumble play as well, because we had a lot of children that liked to wrestle. And so we'd create a space, a zone just for that. And the children had an agreement in place. And if someone broke the agreement, they were really quick to be accountable to one another and say, you know what, Sally, you broke the agreement. And part of the consequence, if you break the agreement, you did this and it broke the agreement, part of the consequence is that you leave this space. You know, and while they may not be as eloquent as that, they get that point across and they have ownership over it. I love this in the chat box. Saying no to weapon play doesn't stop children from wanting to play that way. The learning can be so rich when working out what is socially acceptable and what isn't. How can we do this safely? What are our rules? And that's it. I think it's, you know, identifying how do we do this safely. And again, you know, for some children, it may be that they're going back to some of those things that may be happening in their life or that they may be seeing happening. Whether we like it or not, children are exposed to a really high level of media violence. You know, I think we try and keep them sheltered as much as possible, but I know even for myself, my kids love watching, particularly my 10-year-old, he loves trivia, and we have a family trivia quiz every week with my mum and dad. And we also love watching The Chase, the trivia show on at like 5 o'clock here. And so my kids will watch that. But then they do, in the ad breaks, they say, this is what's coming up on the news. And they start talking about someone being stabbed in a park. And like, I'm always trying to turn it off in the ad breaks because I'm like, the trivia show itself is great. They love it. They love being involved in it. But then they're hearing this violence and, you know, world experience and whatever. So as much as we try and shelter them from it, children will have that in their life. And so being able to kind of navigate some of those thoughts around that, or, you know, to make sense of it or understand it and to do it safely, I think is important for them. Again, it's, you know, putting things in place that we're all comfortable with. Some parents may not be comfortable with this type of play, absolutely. And I think that's, and it's one of the things that I say a lot is you need to develop a culture for your service. And so if your service decides we're comfortable with weapon play or rough and tumble play, or we're comfortable with tree climbing or whatever it happens to be, then you make that a part of your service culture. You make it a part of your philosophy. You have policies in place that, you know, say this is how we do this and this is why we do it. You find research that supports that. You build a bit of a catalogue of this is why we do what we do. And then probably one of my biggest things that I say to services when I'm doing consultancy work is make that clear to families when they come to your service. The minute they walk in the door, and sometimes even before, you can make it clear in, you know, your marketing or your website or what you put out on social media or whatever, that this is how we play, this is what we do, this is what we value, it's who we are. But I think when you're clear to families when they come in, like I used to be with our muddy mess and the child carrying the chicken and tyres being here, there and everywhere, and I'd say to families, you know what, this is us. This is how we play. We believe in loose parts. We value muddy play. We, think that it's important that children do X, Y, and Z if they want to. And then I always say to families, and if you're not comfortable with that, this may not be the right setting for you. These are the things that we're comfortable with and that we've, kind of worked as a team to develop and that our service values. And it may not be the right fit for you, and that is okay. And I think you have a responsibility to be honest with families. What families generally get annoyed about, I think, with like weapon play and stuff, is when they don't even know that it might be a thing. And so they arrive to see children, jabbing each other with swords and go, oh, why is that happening? And is my child being bullied, or is this rough? Is this normal? Is this, and I think the more transparent we are with why we do what we do with children and why we support children to play, I think, again, open communication. If we're open with children, with families about the way in which children play and the way we observe that and the way we supervise it and the way we support it and all those sorts of things, then I think we set ourselves up for less of that confrontation or that ickiness that sometimes happens when parents go, why did you let that happen? Why was my child donked over the head with a toy sword? Because, why are they playing with swords? And, if the conversation has happened beforehand, there's less of that because everyone's on the same page to begin with. All right.
So, Nicole, just a warning, 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. So I love this little fact here, which is that from the age of about 3 through 5, pretend weapon play is normal. Having aggressive feelings is and has been normal since birth. By 3, there is an outlet for such feelings, which is a step above tantrums, and that is pretend play, sometimes with make-believe weapons. So often we see that with our toddlers, when I'm having those feelings, my response is, and I'll throw myself on the floor and whatever. For some children, that pretend play is a step above that. It's moving out of that. And that may be, that rough and tumble weapon kind of play. So I think it's important that we have that opportunity for them. And that was an interesting little article. It was just called When Little Kids Play War. So we can safely support weapon play. As I said before, it might be that we're developing agreements with children. We're providing appropriate environments. Is it going to be appropriate for us to play with weapons inside in the art space? Probably not. Is it much safer to do that outside? Absolutely. Effective supervision. That's obviously one of our roles as the educator. And again, communication with the children, communication amongst staff, communication with families. So we can do that, all of that. I'll just touch briefly on challenging gender stereotypes. So for me, it's like a no-brainer, but unfortunately it is something that we still come up against. And where I've found the most challenge is not generally with the children. The children are generally pretty open to playing with whatever, and they don't seem to bat an eyelid at, my son, when he was 2 and 3, he was the one who was always in the fairy princess costume. Like, he just much preferred that costume because it felt nice. The material was lovely, and, he'd have the glitzy shoes on and whatever because he loved it and it felt great. Did the other kids notice? No, not really. Children at that age just don't notice and they don't care. Where you can have a problem sometimes is the parents. Parents will come in and go, why is my son in a dress? He shouldn't be dressing up like that. That's boys' thing. That's a girl's thing. Or why is my son playing with babies? And generally, I hate to say it, but it generally seems to be on the boys. Those stereotypes around dramatic play and role play seems to be negatively geared towards the boys. So, the boys dressing up or playing babies or house or whatever, I feel like it shouldn't be a thing anymore, but it still is. So it's really important that we challenge that as educators. And again, going back to those loose parts, open-ended kind of play things, big pieces of fabric that double as a cape, but might also be a skirt or might also be a pair of wings that we can tie up or whatever, kind of takes away some of that I suppose, you know, as opposed to having the Anna and Elsa dresses that then everyone fights over because we all want to be Elsa or whatever. And then someone says, well, you can't be Elsa because you're a boy, or, you know, we're not having that because we've got more open-ended materials. I might leave that one there for a minute because we'll run out of time. All right, so how do we observe and document dramatic play? So like anything, I think we need to think about the way in which we document and observe play. Really simple strategies, which I love, particularly for dramatic play. Take photos, but try not to intrude. There is nothing worse than a group of children playing and an educator standing there like this with a camera or an iPad trying to take photos and, oh, let me get a photo of you. You know, we really need to be mindful of not intruding in the play. So I take a lot of photos at early childhood services, and I use a digital SLR. I try and use my biggest lens possible so I can be on the other side of the room or the other side of the playground, capturing those little moments but not interfering in the play, trying to stay out of it where possible. Likewise, videos and recordings, and I think they're really good for you as an educator reviewing the video or the recording later to really identify what was happening. Because if you're trying to watch a play scenario, a dramatic play scenario unfolding, it's really hard to keep up with what's going on. So, you know, capturing a video of it is amazing if you can. But again, trying not to interfere with what children are doing. Documenting with children, letting them tell their own story. So again, in the book Boys and Girls, she talks a lot about that, letting children tell their story and act out their stories. It can be really meaningful for them. Claire Warden's Talking and Thinking Floor books also really talks about that importance of documenting with children. So rather than me telling the story of the play that was happening over there, the group of children who were involved in the play actually tell the story, and we write it together, and we share that together. Things like time samples, tracking themes, tracking evolution, that can just be more an interesting thing for us as educators to see what are the recurring themes that we're seeing in our play. Why is that happening? Does it happen at certain times of the day? Does the play flow through different parts of the playground or through the space? So those sorts of things are really interesting from an educator as researcher point of view, you know, really giving us something to look at rather than just writing down, they went to the home corner and got the babies. Then they went to this area and they did this. Then this happened. Like, let's make it a little more engaging and interesting. Let's look at why it's happening. Why is the play occurring in that way? Why is it unfolding in this way? And kind of go from there. All right. Oh, I think we nearly made it. So just one last little quote for you from someone who's probably little well known. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand. So I really love that because it really highlights that value of imagination. I think, you know, we tend to lose it a little bit as we get older, and I think it's one of those things that if we could all embrace a little bit more of our imagination, the world would probably be a little bit more interesting place. So I think that's a nice one to finish up on. Now, I'll put my contact details there. If you want to get in touch, you're more than welcome to do that. If you've got any questions, if you want any links, anything that I haven't been able to get to. I felt like an hour and 20 minutes was going to be like a really long time, but it went so fast. But yeah, if anyone's got any quick questions before we do finish up, you're more than welcome. I say that was a lot of stuff, a lot to get through.
It was. Thank you very much, Nicole. And I like the way that you kept it a simple presentation that we can take from that, and the 4 blocks that you can each go in each direction, that you're not, you know, we're not put in one direction. Yes, what was the title of the Boys and Girls book? I
will put it in the chat box right now.
And the Goldstein article, what can you remember the name, or tell us the name of that Goldstein 2020 article?
I will find that one for you.
So I have put in the link to Angela presenting with Inspired, and I have
Oh,
put
thank you.
Angela's book in there. And there was another one I did add in, I think.
The book's also available on our website too, so I'll pop that down. We have got copies in stock at the moment because they can be a bit hard to get hold of.
Okay. Yep, and Peter Gray, that article I have posted in the chat box as well.
Excellent.
Okay, so to everyone else, a big thank you to Nicole.
Thank you.
Can we give her all a virtual clap?
Thank